I should have known something was wrong the moment I rang the doorbell. Normally, when I visited my son Marcus, he would answer with that warm smile I remembered from his childhood. The one that made me feel like I was the most important person in his world. But this time, it was Zariah who opened the door. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped the handle like she owned the place, which, to be fair, she probably believed she did. "Oh, you're here," she said, her voice carrying that condescending tone she reserved just for me. It was the kind of tone that made me feel like an unwelcome guest in my own son's home. I clutched the small gift bag I'd brought with me, a hand-knitted sweater for my grandson Tommy. It was something I'd worked on for weeks, hoping to give him a piece of me, a piece of love. But it felt like Zariah wasn't interested in receiving either. "Hello, Zariah. I brought something for Tommy's birthday," I said, trying my best to sound cheerful despite the icy reception. She didn't move aside to let me in. Instead, she took a quick glance at my dress, a simple black one that I thought looked nice, though clearly not nice enough for her standards. "Marcus is still getting ready. The other guests are already here," she said, her eyes briefly scanning me before turning her back to walk away. Other guests I hadn't known there would be anyone else. The last I heard, Marcus had called me last week, his voice strained and almost apologetic, inviting me over for a small family dinner to celebrate Tommy's 5th birthday. But now it seemed it wasn't just a simple family gathering. I walked in, feeling every inch the outsider. The living room was full of well-dressed couples, laughing and talking in that hushed, important way people do when they think their conversations matter more than anyone else's. I recognised a few faces from the society pages of the local newspaper. I'd never fit in with them. Tommy's voice cut through the chatter, a beacon of warmth in a room that felt colder by the second. "Grandma Sherry." He ran toward me, his little arms outstretched, and for a moment everything felt right again. He smelled like birthday cake and childhood innocence. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered as I hugged him, my heart swelling with love. "I made you something special." But before I could hand him the gift, Zariah's hand was on his shoulder, pulling him away. "Tommy, remember what we talked about? Grandma needs to wash her hands first." She didn't say it in a polite tone. It was clear I wasn't clean enough to touch her son. "Why don't you go play with your cousins?" she added, dismissing me in front of Tommy, who looked confused and reluctant to leave my side. It was the first of many subtle and not so subtle signals that I wasn't welcome. Dinner was even worse. The dining room table stretched on, set with china I'd never seen before, probably wedding gifts from Zariah's side of the family. The place where I was seated felt like an afterthought, squeezed between an empty chair and Marcus's college friend, who spent the entire meal talking loudly about his latest business acquisition. I tried to eat, but every bite felt like sand in my mouth. Marcus caught my eye once during the appetizer course. He offered a weak smile, but when Zariah whispered something in his ear, he looked away. My heart sank a little deeper. I tried to pretend that everything was fine, that this wasn't the same son who used to rush home from school just to sit next to me on the couch. This wasn't the same Marcus who, when I had a bad day, would take my hand and promise that everything would be okay. Zariah's voice rang out sharply across the table during the main course, making everyone pause and turn their attention to her. "Marcus tells me you're still working at that little cleaning company," she said. The way she emphasized "little" made it sound as though the very mention of it was beneath her. A few guests turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks. "I own a business," I replied quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, not wanting to make a scene. Zariah laughed a sound like ice clinking in a glass. "Oh, how sweet. A business." She turned to the woman beside her. "Sherry does office cleaning. Very humble work." The woman nodded politely, but I caught the subtle shift in her posture, the slight angle of her body, as if trying to distance herself from me. I knew that move. It was the kind of unconscious recoil people have when they think they're in the presence of someone beneath their social station. I tried to eat, but the food had no taste. Around me, the conversation flowed about vacation homes in the Hamptons' private school decisions and investment portfolios. I had nothing to contribute to these topics, not because I didn't want to, but because they wouldn't care to hear anything from someone like me. It felt as though I was invisible, my presence only tolerated because it was expected of Marcus's family to host me. Then came dessert. Tommy had escaped from the children's table and climbed onto my lap, chocolate cake smeared all over his hands. "Grandma, will you tell me the story about the princess who saved herself?" he asked eagerly. It was a tradition we had, a story I made up years ago about a princess who didn't need rescuing because she was clever and strong. But just as I opened my mouth to begin, Zariah stood up. Her face was flushed with anger. "Tommy, get down from there right now!" she commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You'll get your clothes dirty." "But, Mom, I want to hear Grandma's story," Tommy said, his voice small and pleading. Before I could say anything else, Zariah grabbed him from my lap with such force that he let out a small whimper. She turned to me, then her eyes blazing. "I think it's time for you to leave." The room fell silent. Even the man who'd been monopolizing the conversation about his business deals stopped mid-sentence, his fork halfway to his mouth. I felt 20 pairs of eyes on me, and every single one of them was judging me. "Zariah, please!" I started, my voice barely above a whisper, pleading for her to reconsider. "Security!" she called out loudly, her words ringing out in the stunned silence. "Could you please escort this woman out? She's disturbing our family dinner." Marcus stood up slowly. His face was pale, his expression unreadable. "Zariah, that's my mother," he said quietly. But Zariah's voice rang out again, dripping with venom. "Your mother doesn't belong at a table with decent people. Look at her, Marcus. She's embarrassing you, embarrassing us, embarrassing our son." I don't remember standing up. I don't remember walking to the door. The only thing I remember is the sound of my heart pounding in my chest, drowning out everything else as I made my way out. The cool evening air hit me like a slap in the face as I stepped outside. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find my car keys. As I fumbled in my purse, I heard the front door close behind me with a definitive click. Sitting in my car, I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror, 68 years old. Silver hair mussed from Tommy's enthusiastic hug. My nicest dress suddenly felt like rags. I looked exactly like what Zariah had called me, a poor old woman who didn't know her place. But what Zariah didn't know, what none of them knew, was that tomorrow morning I would walk into the gleaming headquarters of Meridian Technologies, take the elevator to the top floor, and sit behind the mahogany desk in the corner office, the same company where Zariah worked as a marketing manager, believing she was climbing the corporate ladder with her sharp tongue and calculated cruelty. The next morning, I woke up early, a sense of calm filling me as I prepared for what was to come. I had worked tirelessly for 35 years to build Meridian Technologies, a company that started from nothing. In those early days, I faced skepticism and doubt, especially because I was a woman in a male-dominated field. People laughed at the idea of a woman running a tech company. But here, I was sitting in the office I'd fought to create, ready to see Zariah's world turned upside down. By the time I arrived at Meridian, it was still dark outside. The building, a sleek and modern structure, stood silently against the grey morning sky. The glass facade reflected the faint light, making it look like a giant mirror. I passed through the security gate, greeted by Miguel, who looked surprised to see me so early. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison," he said, tipping his hat. "You're here bright and early today." "Couldn't sleep," I said, my voice steady. It was the truth, though I had spent most of the night replaying the dinner in my mind, every cruel word, every snide glance, every moment where Zariah had made me feel small. My office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 42nd floor. The view from my floor-to-ceiling windows was nothing short of breathtaking, offering a panoramic vista of the city, the sun slowly beginning to rise over the skyline. But today, I barely glanced at it. I walked straight to my desk, determined to start my day with purpose. I pulled up the employee database and typed in her name, Zariah Mitchell Morrison, Marketing Manager, Digital Campaigns Division. She'd been hired just 18 months ago, and in that short time, she'd made quite an impression on the hiring manager at least. Her performance reviews had been glowing, and her approach to client engagement was lauded as dynamic and innovative. But it was only after digging deeper that I saw the truth. Her behaviour wasn't as impeccable as her resume suggested. 3 formal complaints had been filed against her by older employees. Margaret Chen from accounting was the first. She had complained that Zariah humiliated her during a budget meeting, calling her methods outdated and suggesting she step aside for someone who understood modern business. The complaint had been dismissed, the reasoning being that Zariah was simply advocating for efficiency. The second complaint came from Robert Williams from IT support. He reported that Zariah had made him work overtime on her personal projects and criticised him for not keeping up with the younger employees. Again, her high standards were defended, and the issue was swept under the rug. But it was the third complaint that caught my attention. Janet Rodriguez, 63. A custodial supervisor had filed a grievance after Zariah complained about her inability to move a meeting room cleaning quickly enough to accommodate a last-minute scheduling change. Janet was transferred to the night shift shortly after. I leaned back in my chair, a cold anger settling in my chest. This wasn't just a case of a rude employee. This was a pattern of mistreating older employees, dismissing them as inferior simply because they were not as young or as modern as Zariah believed they should be. She wasn't just toxic in her personal life, she was toxic in the workplace too. Before I could stew on this further, my phone rang, breaking my thoughts. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. I picked it up, trying to maintain my composure. "Mom." His voice was strained, the kind of voice that tells you someone has been crying or holding in a great deal of emotion. "I'm sorry about last night. Zariah she was stressed about the dinner party. She didn't mean what she said." I felt the anger rise, but I swallowed it. I needed to keep a level head. "She called security to have me removed from the table, Marcus. There was no stress that could justify that kind of treatment." There was a long pause on the other end. "I know," he finally admitted, his voice breaking. "I should have said something. I'm sorry. But you know how she gets when she's planning these things. Everything has to be perfect. Perfect." I repeated the word, tasting bitter in my mouth, as if my presence somehow tainted their perfect life. Marcus didn't respond right away. He seemed unsure how to continue, and I knew he was trying to figure out what to say to make it all better. But some things couldn't be fixed with a few apologetic words. "I need some time to think," I told him, my voice firm. "I can't keep doing this." "Of course, Mom. Take your time." I hung up my mind, already focused on what needed to be done next. Zariah had crossed a line and she needed to understand the consequences of her actions. At 8:00 a.m., I was in my office, and by 8:30 my assistant Helen entered, carrying the usual stack of morning mail and a fresh cup of coffee. She set the cup on my desk with a smile before getting down to business. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, handing me a folder, "there's a request for you to review the employee files for the Digital Campaigns Division. Some restructuring might be coming up, and HR thought you might want to have a look." I looked at her, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Thank you, Helen. I'll need those files, especially anything that pertains to Zariah Mitchell Morrison." Helen's eyes narrowed slightly, as if she knew something was brewing, But she said nothing, simply nodding before leaving my office. I pulled the files open, scanning through performance reviews, project reports, and internal communications. The deeper I dug, the more I found. Zariah's behaviour wasn't just unprofessional, it was a clear pattern of age discrimination. In one email, Zariah had written, "Can you believe they're making me work with Janet on the Morrison project? The woman can barely operate a smartphone. Why do we keep these dinosaurs around?" I could feel the blood drain from my face as I read the words. She had used her position to belittle others and create an environment where older employees felt like they didn't belong. Her cruelty wasn't just isolated to me or my family, it was something she practiced daily in her professional life. I placed the files down and stood pacing across my office. This wasn't just about teaching Zariah a lesson for how she treated me. This was bigger than that. This was about setting a precedent in the company that no one, regardless of their age, background, or position, would be treated with anything less than respect. I grabbed my phone and dialed extension 42247. "Jennifer, this is Sherry Morrison. I need to see you in my office immediately, and I want the organisational chart for the digital campaigns division." 20 minutes later, Jennifer walked into my office, a nervous look on her face as she sat across from me. "Mrs. Morrison," she said quietly. "What's this about?" "I've been reviewing some files." I began, my voice steady, but the weight of what I was about to do was clear, and I want to focus on one employee, Zariah Mitchell Morrison. Jennifer nodded, her eyes darting to the door, as if expecting someone to overhear. "What would you like me to do?" I leaned forward, my decision clear. "I want her transferred immediately to the cafeteria, dishwashing." Jennifer blinked in surprise. "The cafeteria?" She asked, the words slow to come out. "Yes," I said firmly. "She needs to learn what it means to do honest work, to treat everyone with the respect they deserve, no matter their position." Jennifer's eyes widened in disbelief. "Mrs. Morrison, that's quite an extreme move. She'll certainly file a grievance." "If she does," I said with a smile, though there was no warmth in it, "let her. Tell her it's part of a company initiative for management personnel to understand all aspects of the operation, and if she refuses, well, there are plenty of companies that would appreciate her dynamic personality." I stood as Jennifer left, a quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. Zariah would face the consequences of her actions, and she would learn what it meant to be humble. I picked up my phone and called the cafeteria manager, making sure that everything was set. Zariah's lesson was about to begin. The next few days passed slowly as I waited to see how Zariah would respond to her new reality. I stayed busy with work, the usual flood of emails and meetings, but in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about what was coming next. I had no doubt she would resist. People like Zariah rarely change. They believe that their status and their wealth entitle them to treat others however they please. But I was determined that she would learn humility, even if it took every ounce of my resolve. By the 4th day, I decided to get closer. I'd heard from Jennifer that Zariah had been struggling with the new assignment, but I wanted to see it for myself. It was the lunch rush in the cafeteria, the noise and chaos offering perfect cover. I slipped into the service corridor wearing a maintenance uniform I had borrowed from the facilities department. The hat covered my silver hair, and I carried a clipboard, hoping to pass as one of the older cleaning staff. At 68, I could easily blend in with them, and that was exactly the point. I positioned myself near the dish pit, where I could observe Zariah without her noticing me. She was there looking every bit the polished executive she used to be, but now her hands were covered in soap-scrubbing dishes in the industrial sinks. Her manicured nails, once pristine, were chipped and ruined. I could see the frustration building in her posture, her shoulders tense with every plate she stacked in the dishwasher. "Excuse me," I said, deliberately roughening my voice and adding a slight accent. "I need to clean the floor around your station." Zariah barely glanced at me, her expression a mix of irritation and embarrassment. "Whatever, just don't get in my way," she muttered, not even bothering to look me in the eye. I moved closer, pretending to mop around her feet, but in reality I was listening carefully to her conversation with Louise, a young man who had been trying to help her adjust to the work. "I don't understand why they're making me do this," Zariah complained, her voice low but sharp. "I have a master's degree in marketing. I was managing a 7-figure campaign portfolio. Now they have me washing dishes like some common what?" Maria, a woman working beside Zariah, interrupted, her voice cool but firm. "You think this work makes us less than you?" Zariah's face flushed with frustration. "That's not what I meant," she said, but the words felt hollow. Janet Rodriguez, the 63-year-old custodial supervisor who had been transferred to the night shift, was at the next station. She looked over at Zariah with a knowing look, a look that spoke volumes. "We're all qualified for something, honey," Janet said as she chopped vegetables with practiced ease. "There's dignity in any honest work." Zariah rolled her eyes when Janet wasn't looking. Easy for her to say. She's probably been doing this her whole life. She muttered loud enough for me to hear. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing, even in the midst of doing work that had humbled her. Zariah couldn't resist looking down on others. I could see her eyes darting around the room, judging everyone. Her entitlement was so ingrained that she couldn't see the value in the people around her. I could feel my anger rising, but I maintained my composure, letting the moment pass. I didn't want to confront her just yet. Instead, I quietly mopped the floor, listening to her continue her rants, her words dripping with disdain. "I'm sorry, but this is just ridiculous," Zariah said to Louise, scraping the remnants off a plate with unnecessary force. "These people are just maintenance. They're just here because they can't do anything else. They should be grateful for any work they can get." I felt my grip tighten around the mop handle, but I kept my movements slow and steady. This was exactly the attitude I had hoped she would confront. She was learning nothing from this experience. She continued oblivious to the people working around her. "That lady over there," she said, nodding toward Janet, "probably never even finished high school. And that woman with the accent who was here earlier, probably illegal. They should be grateful they have any work at all." I stopped mopping, my heart racing with anger. I had heard enough. This wasn't about teaching Zariah humility anymore. This was about exposing the ugly truth of who she was and how she viewed the world. Her cruelty, her discrimination, and her inability to learn from the very people she had belittled, all of it needed to be addressed. Just as I was about to leave, I overheard Zariah say one last thing. "You know what the really sick part is?" she asked, her voice rising with frustration. "My mother-in-law probably loves this. She's probably sitting in her little apartment, laughing about how her successful daughter-in-law got knocked down a peg." My blood ran cold. Even here, even while suffering the consequences of her actions, she was still thinking about how to blame others. She was incapable of taking responsibility for her behaviour. She was still playing the victim. I finished mopping my hands, trembling, as I left the kitchen and returned to my office. The rest of the day passed in a blur, my mind fixed on what I had just witnessed. Zariah was not learning humility. She was stewing in her resentment. It was time to end this. Later that evening, Marcus called again, sounding worried. "Mum, I'm really concerned about Zariah. She's been coming home exhausted and upset every night. She's convinced that someone at work is targeting her, that it's some kind of discrimination. She's really struggling. Has she told you about her new role?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "The cross-training program where she's learning all aspects of the business. That's what she's doing. It's not a punishment, Marcus." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice hesitant. "She wants to apologise. She wants to make things right between you two." I almost laughed, but I stopped myself. Zariah didn't want to apologise. She wanted to fix the damage to her own reputation. "Tell her I'm not ready for that conversation yet," I said quietly. The phone call ended, and I knew exactly what had to happen next. Zariah had shown her true colours. It was time to bring everything into the light and confront her once and for all. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with HR. Zariah would learn the truth, what she had done to me, to the people in her department, and what her actions had cost her. She was going to learn that there were consequences for treating people with disdain simply because she thought she was better than them. The meeting was set for 10:00 a.m., and I made sure everything was in place. The morning air felt crisp as I walked through the quiet halls of Meridian Technologies, my heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing in the stillness. The employees had already started filing in, heading to their desks, preparing for another day of work. I wasn't sure what Zariah thought of her new role in the cafeteria, but I could guess her pride wouldn't allow her to accept this as anything other than a demotion. When I arrived at my office, I sat down at my desk, taking a deep breath and exhaling slowly. There was no turning back now. I knew that the conversation I was about to have with Zariah would be tense. She wouldn't take kindly to being called out, and she would surely try to shift the blame onto me or anyone else she could use as a scapegoat. But I was ready for her. Helen, my trusted assistant of 15 years, knocked on the door to announce Zariah's arrival. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, "your 1000 is here." "Send her in," I replied, my voice steady. The door opened, and Zariah walked in, looking less like the polished marketing manager I had once known, and more like someone caught off guard. Her usually immaculate appearance was now replaced with a tired, drawn face and rumpled clothes that spoke volumes. She wore the casual attire required for her new job, a far cry from the power suits she used to don when she was on top of the world. Her eyes flicked around the room, confused clearly, wondering why she was being called into my office on the executive floor. Her face quickly morphed into one of suspicion, her lips curling into a tight smile, trying to hold on to whatever composure she could muster. "You," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "What are you? How did you get in here?" I didn't respond immediately. I turned in my chair to look out the large windows, staring at the city skyline for a moment, letting the tension build. Finally, I turned back to her, locking eyes with her for the first time since that humiliating dinner. "How did I get in here?" I repeated her words slowly, a small smile curling at the corner of my mouth. "I walk in the same way as everyone else, through my private entrance." Zariah's eyes widened as she realised the significance of what I was saying. The realisation hit her like a thunderclap. I wasn't just some random woman she could push around. I wasn't just Marcus's mother, the one she could belittle and insult without consequences. I was the CEO of the company she worked for, her employer, the one who signed her paycheck. I motioned for her to sit, and she hesitated before taking a seat across from me. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Zariah's eyes darted between my face and the sleek, polished decor of my office, likely trying to process how everything had turned upside down so quickly. I slid her employee file across the desk, opening it to the first page. "I'm afraid I am the CEO of Meridian Technologies, Zariah, and I've been reviewing your employee records." I paused, letting her take that in. 3 formal complaints in the last year, all related to how you treat older employees. Complaints about how you belittle them, treat them as inferior, and even openly mock them. Zariah froze her mouth, opening and closing as if she were searching for a defense, but nothing came out. I could see the mask slipping, the veneer of polished arrogance cracking before my eyes. I leaned forward, letting the silence hang between us. "You've been disrespectful to the very people who keep this company running. Zariah," I said, my voice low but firm. "Margaret Chen, Robert Williams, Janet Rodriguez, they all came to me with complaints about your behaviour, and yet you've continued to get away with it because of your so-called high standards." Zariah shifted in her seat, looking uncomfortable, but still trying to maintain some semblance of control. "That's not what I meant," she said quickly, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm just trying to push for efficiency, These people, they're not these people, I interrupted sharply. They're hard-working employees who have more experience and wisdom than you'll ever have. Just because you're younger and have a degree doesn't mean you're entitled to treat them like garbage. Zariah's cheeks flushed with anger, but she stayed quiet, realizing she couldn't win this argument. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to find a way to spin the situation in her favor, but I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. I tapped the file in front of her. I've also seen your comments about your coworkers in the cafeteria. You complained about the dinosaurs who work in this company, dismissing them as maintenance. How do you think it feels to be treated that way? Her eyes darted to the side, clearly avoiding my gaze. I was just frustrated. This whole thing is ridiculous. I'm qualified for more than this. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. The thing is, Zariah, we all have a place. Some people are more visible in their roles while others do the hard work behind the scenes, but none of that means they're less valuable. Do you understand that? Her face twisted in frustration. I don't need a lecture from you. You don't know what it's like to be constantly overlooked, to be dismissed because of your age, your gender, or whatever else people think is wrong with you. I stood up, walking around the desk to stand in front of her. I've built this company from the ground up, Zariah. I've faced every kind of obstacle, and yet I'm still here because I've learned the value of people, of respect, and I'm not going to let you continue running roughshod over the people who helped build this place. Zariah opened her mouth to argue, but I raised my hand to stop her. Here's the deal, I said, my tone icy. You have two choices. You can continue to work in the cafeteria, cleaning dishes, and maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to learn something about what it means to be truly humble. Or you can walk out that door, resign, and find another company that will let you treat their employees however you want. She stood up abruptly, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and anger. You're threatening me! No, Zariah, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm offering you a choice. But make no mistake, the consequences for your actions are not going to disappear just because you're upset. You can't just act like the world owes you everything and expect no backlash. Zariah looked like she was about to say something more, but instead she turned and walked toward the door. As she reached the handle, she paused and turned back to me, her voice trembling with defiance. You'll regret this, she said, her words barely a whisper. I'll make sure Marcus knows what's going on. I didn't flinch. Do what you must, but remember this, Zariah. You can't hide from the truth forever. With that, she slammed the door behind her, and I stood there for a moment, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over me. I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Zariah would fight back, of course. She would try to manipulate the situation, to twist the narrative in her favor. But I was ready for that, and this time I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I'd made my decision. Now Zariah had to make hers. The next few days passed in an uneasy quiet. I could feel the tension brewing beneath the surface. Zariah didn't come into the office the next day, which was expected. It wasn't just that she had been humiliated, her pride had been wounded, and that was the kind of thing that would make anyone lash out. I didn't hear from her again until late afternoon when my phone buzzed with an incoming message from Marcus. Mom, we need to talk. Zariah wants me to meet you tomorrow. She says she wants to apologize. Please just hear her out. I stared at the message, taking a moment to process what he was asking. The anger that had simmered in me from the night of the dinner flared up again. Apologize. Zariah wasn't capable of true remorse. She wasn't coming to me because she realized her wrongs. She was coming because she needed to fix the damage to her reputation. But I wasn't going to make the same mistake of thinking she could change just because of a few words. I sighed and typed back, tell her I'll meet with her, but she has to understand that this is not about her being sorry. It's about consequences for her actions. Marcus quickly replied, thanks, Mom. I'll set it up. I sat back in my chair, looking out over the city through the windows of my office. Meridian Technologies had grown exponentially since I started it. I had fought for this place, for the culture of respect, hard work, and dignity that we tried to uphold. Zariah had challenged all of that. She didn't just insult me, she insulted everyone who had ever worked for this company, especially those who were older or in support roles. I had given her the chance to see how the other half lived, but instead of reflecting, she had deepened her sense of entitlement. When the time came for our meeting, I made sure everything was in place. I had spent years learning the art of patience, and I knew that the conversation with Zariah wouldn't be easy. When Marcus and Zariah arrived at my office the next morning, the tension in the room was palpable. Marcus looked exhausted, caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother. Zariah, on the other hand, looked even more put together than before, as if she thought her appearance could somehow change the outcome of the situation. I gestured for them to sit, my gaze unwavering. "You wanted to talk, Zariah. Here we are," I said calmly, though there was an edge to my voice. She fidgeted in her seat, avoiding my eyes for a moment before taking a deep breath. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you," she said, her voice shaky. "I realize now that I was wrong." I studied her carefully, looking for any sign that this apology was genuine. There was none. It wasn't the words, but the tone that gave it away. She was trying to regain control of the situation, not truly acknowledging the depth of her actions. "Zariah, you're sorry for embarrassing me," I said, cutting through the surface-level apology. "But that's not the problem. The problem is how you treat people, how you've treated everyone around you who isn't on your level." Her face tightened, and she glanced quickly at Marcus before speaking again, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, I was frustrated. Everything has been falling apart at work and I've been under a lot of stress. But I never meant to be cruel." I held up my hand, stopping her. "The stress is no excuse, Zariah. You made a choice. You chose to treat people with disdain. You made a choice to humiliate them because you thought they were beneath you. It's not just about what happened at the dinner, or even about what happened here at work. It's about the way you've treated people your entire life." She stared at me for a long time, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. "I don't think I'm that bad," she muttered almost to herself. "I just want to do better. For the company. For Marcus and Tommy." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Zariah," he started, his voice hesitant. "I don't think you fully understand what Mum's been trying to say. This isn't just about work. It's about your character, how you treat people. You can't keep pushing people down and thinking that they don't matter." Zariah shot him a look of frustration. "I know what I did was wrong, but I need you to understand how hard I've been working. I've been doing everything I can to build something for us, for our family, and now I feel like I'm being punished for it." I couldn't hold back any longer. "You want sympathy? You're not getting it from me. I'm not punishing you for working hard, Zariah. I'm punishing you for treating people like garbage. You've humiliated employees. You've humiliated me. You've made a mockery of everything we've worked for here." There was a long silence as my words sank in. Zariah shifted in her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the chair tightly. She was desperate to keep control of the situation, but it was slipping away from her. Finally, she spoke, her voice small. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said, her tone quieter, now more subdued. "I didn't realize how much damage I had done, but I'm trying to fix things. I want to be a better person. I don't know how to do it, but I want to try." I leaned forward, my expression hardening. "You want to try. It's not enough to just want something. It takes more than that. It takes accountability. It takes humility. If you want to fix this, you're going to have to do the hard work, and I'm not going to make it easy for you." Zariah's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away, clearly, not wanting to show weakness. What do you want from me? Do you want me to leave? Do you want me to quit? I shook my head. No, Zariah, I'm not asking you to leave. But if you want to stay here, if you want to stay in this company and in this family, you need to learn what it means to respect people. You need to work harder than you've ever worked before, and you need to do it with kindness. No more making excuses. No more blaming others. She nodded slowly, a look of realization crossing her face. I'll do whatever it takes. Marcus exhaled clearly, relieved by the turn in the conversation. Thank you, Mom, he said quietly, glancing at Zariah. I know this hasn't been easy for either of you. I nodded, but I wasn't done yet. Zariah, I said, my tone firm, but not unkind. You have a lot of work to do. Don't think for a second that you can walk away from this and have everything be fine. You've been given a second chance. Don't waste it. Zariah opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it again, as if realizing that no words could change the situation. Now go, I said, gesturing towards the door. Get to work. Prove to me and to everyone else that you can change. The moment Zariah left the office, Marcus turned to me, a mixture of gratitude and guilt in his eyes. I know she's hard to deal with, Mom, but thank you for giving her another chance. She needs to learn, and she needs you more than she realizes. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. She needs to learn the hard way, Marcus, and you're going to have to be patient with her. But remember, this people only change when they are forced to confront the truth about themselves. There was a long silence before Marcus spoke again. I know. I think we're getting there. Slowly, but we're getting there. I turned back to him, my voice softening. I hope so, for all of our sakes. As I sat back at my desk, I knew this wasn't the end. The road ahead would be difficult for all of us, especially for Zariah, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could still learn the lessons that matter most. The following weeks felt like a slow, tense unraveling. Zariah, to her credit, did what she could to keep up appearances. She showed up every day working in the cafeteria, scrubbing dishes, cleaning the floors, and generally trying to keep her head down. But it was clear to me that she wasn't learning as much as I had hoped. Instead of humbling herself, she seemed to be plotting her escape. The sharpness in her eyes hadn't softened, and the tension in her posture didn't ease. Every day she seemed to find new ways to make herself feel superior to those around her. She would roll her eyes when the cafeteria manager asked her to do something, or sigh dramatically when a coworker showed her how to work a piece of equipment she hadn't used before. The arrogance in her attitude was still there, just more hidden, more insidious. I kept an eye on her, watching her struggle with the work. I wasn't trying to be cruel. If anything, I was hoping she would break down, that she would finally realize what it was like to be on the other side of the power dynamic she had once taken for granted. But it wasn't happening. Instead, she blamed everyone else. Blamed the equipment, blamed the schedules, blamed the other employees. Never once did she take responsibility for the way she had treated others or for her own role in getting herself into this situation. Meanwhile, I was making changes. I had already spoken to HR about implementing new sensitivity training for all management staff. No one would be exempt. I also made sure to promote Janet Rodriguez to a leadership position in the cafeteria. Janet had been with the company for over 2 decades, and her experience and wisdom were invaluable. She was a quiet leader, the kind who earned respect through hard work and kindness. I wanted to reward that, and I wanted to show the other employees that they were appreciated, no matter their role. I also began meeting with the older employees who had filed complaints against Zariah, Margaret Chen, Robert Williams, and others who had suffered under Zariah's reign. I wanted to make sure they knew that their voices mattered, that I was listening, and that I was committed to creating an environment where everyone could thrive. But no matter how much I did to improve things, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Zariah was still out there trying to figure out how to wiggle her way out of her punishment. Every time I passed her in the hallway, her eyes would flicker with a mix of anger and desperation. I knew she was plotting something. Then came the day that it all came to a head. It started with a meeting, a regular check-in with the HR department to review progress on the changes I had implemented. I had just finished talking to Jennifer about the new procedures when I received an urgent message from my assistant Helen. Mrs. Morrison, Zariah Mitchell Morrison, is requesting a meeting. She says it's urgent and wants to discuss her position in the company. I stared at the message for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. I knew exactly what this was about. Zariah had finally decided to confront me. She was done with the cafeteria, done with being humiliated. She wanted out. I quickly replied, "Set up the meeting for 10:30. I'll be there." By the time the meeting rolled around, I was already mentally prepared for what was coming. I had no illusions left. Zariah had been given more than enough time to reflect and change. Now it was time for her to either accept responsibility for her actions or face the consequences. She arrived promptly at 10:30, her expression carefully neutral. Gone was the defensiveness she had worn in our previous encounters, replaced by a calm resolve that I knew all too well. The air between us was thick with the tension of what was about to unfold. "Zariah," I said as I gestured for her to sit, "what can I do for you today?" "Yes." She didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I'm done," she said bluntly. "I'm done with the cafeteria. I can't keep doing this. I know you think I've been disrespectful, but I've been punished enough. I want my position back. I want to return to my old job." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "You've been punished enough. You say—" I repeated her words, my voice low. "Do you truly understand what you've done, Zariah, what you've put people through? This isn't about you getting your old job back. This is about you learning the value of respect, of hard work, of humility. And that doesn't happen in 1 week or 1 month." Her lips pressed together in frustration, and she looked down at the desk, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge. "I don't think I can do it anymore. I can't keep working in the kitchen. I've been humiliated every day, and for what? For a mistake I made." I raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. "You haven't been humiliated, Zariah. You've been given an opportunity to learn, to see the value in the work that people like Janet and Maria do every single day. What you're feeling now, that's the discomfort of realizing that you were wrong, that the people you thought were beneath you were actually the backbone of this company." Zariah's eyes darted to the floor, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of realization, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by the defensive armor she had built up over the years. "I don't want to work in the cafeteria anymore." She repeated, her voice a little more forceful this time. "I want to be back in marketing. I want to show you I can do better." I paused, considering her request. Part of me wanted to just let her go, to allow her to resign and move on with her life, but another part of me knew that if I did that, she would never learn the lesson she needed to. She would walk away, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. "You have 2 choices," I said, slowly, my voice steady and unwavering. "You can continue working in the cafeteria, working alongside people you once looked down on, and you can prove that you've learned the lesson of humility and respect. Or you can walk out that door, resign from your position, and take responsibility for your actions in another way." Zariah's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she might leave right then and there, but she didn't. Instead, she looked at me, her gaze hardening with something that resembled determination or perhaps defiance. "I'll stay," she said. Finally, her voice strained but resolute. "But I'm not going to work in the cafeteria forever. I want to earn back my place in the company. I'll work for it, but I'm not giving up on my career." I nodded slowly, letting her words settle. "We'll see how much you're willing to work for it, Zariah. I expect nothing less than full commitment, and if you can't live up to that, then there's no place for you here." She stood up, her posture a little more rigid than before. "I'll prove myself," she said quietly. "You'll see." As she left my office, I felt the weight of the decision I had just made. It wasn't easy, but it was the right one. Zariah had a long road ahead of her, but if she truly wanted to change, she had to start by accepting the consequences of her actions. She had to be willing to put in the work not just for her career, but for her own growth. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about the possibility of change, and I was willing to give her that chance, even if she didn't fully realize the magnitude of what she had just agreed to. The weeks that followed were a slow and sometimes painful process. Zariah's resolve to prove herself was evident, but it was unclear whether her efforts were truly genuine or if she was simply trying to regain her position as quickly as possible. The way she worked in the cafeteria remained indifferent, like a child forced to do chores they didn't understand, and there were days when I caught her glaring at her coworkers, her anger still burning under the surface. But on other days, I noticed subtle shifts in her behavior. For the first time, Zariah showed up on time without complaint. She worked her shifts without trying to delegate her tasks or avoid the harder jobs. Janet, who had taken the supervisory position, noticed it too. There were moments when Zariah would actually make small talk with the custodial staff or offer to help with extra tasks, and I could see a faint flicker of humility in her eyes. But those moments were often fleeting, overshadowed by her other, more ingrained tendencies. I watched her closely. I couldn't afford to let her slide back into old habits, not after all she had done. I had made it clear that this was a test, and I wasn't going to be lenient if she tried to manipulate her way out of it. One afternoon, after a particularly busy lunch rush, I saw Zariah standing near the back of the cafeteria, watching the other employees scrub down the counters. She wasn't helping, just standing there, her arms crossed tightly. I knew it was time to talk to her again. I approached her slowly, trying to gauge her mood before I spoke. When she saw me, she gave me a tight, almost defensive smile. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her tone polite, but distant. "How are things?" "They're fine," I said, my voice calm. "But I think we need to talk." Her face dropped slightly, as if she already knew what was coming. "About what?" she asked, her voice tight, almost cautious. I paused for a moment, looking at her carefully. "I've been watching you, Zariah. I've seen the way you've been working. Some days it's good. You help with the dishes, you keep up with the other staff. But other days, you're still standing off to the side, doing nothing, waiting for someone to tell you what to do. You think that's enough." Zariah's eyes shifted away from me, and I could see the struggle in her expression. She didn't want to admit it, but I knew she understood the message. "I've been trying," she said finally, her voice quieter now. "It's just hard. I'm not used to this. This isn't what I signed up for." I nodded, my expression softening slightly. "I know it's hard, but you have to understand, it's not about what you signed up for. It's about who you are, who you choose to be. You're here now, and this is part of your growth. You can either keep fighting it or learn from it." She didn't answer immediately, and for a brief moment I thought she might finally break down and say something real. Instead, she stood there silently, her arms still crossed. After what felt like an eternity, she looked at me again, but her gaze was different, softer, perhaps a little defeated. "I don't know how to change," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to know all the answers, Zariah," I replied, the words coming easier now. "But you have to be willing to try, to show up every day with the intent to learn, not just do what's necessary to get by. You have to start respecting the people around you, start seeing their value, not just their role." She looked at me for a long time, and I could see the weight of her struggle in her eyes. For the first time, she didn't look like she was trying to control the situation. She looked tired, unsure, and perhaps even willing to listen. "I'm trying," she said again, her voice small. "But I need to know if it's even worth it. I need to know if I can really come back from all of this." I could see the doubt in her eyes, the skepticism that had been there all along. She wanted reassurance, wanted to know that there was a clear path back to her old life, to her former success. But there wasn't. Not anymore. Not until she proved she had changed. Only you can decide if it's worth it. Zariah. I said, my tone softer now. You've already made the first step by admitting you were wrong, but it's going to take time. It's going to take consistent effort. If you want to rebuild your career, your reputation, you have to be willing to earn it back. No shortcuts, no manipulation, just hard work. She nodded slowly, but I could see the uncertainty still clouding her face. I understand, she said quietly. I let the silence linger for a moment. Good, I said finally. I'll be watching, and so will everyone else. But it's your choice. Show us who you really are. With that, I turned to leave, but before I walked away, I paused. Zariah was still standing there, her posture stiff, but I knew there was something different in the air now. Whether she admitted it or not, the first step toward true change had been taken. The question was whether she would continue down this path, or if she would try to go back to her old ways. That evening, I sat at my desk, reflecting on the conversation. It wasn't a victory. There would be no quick fixes for Zariah, but maybe, just maybe, she would start to understand the lesson that had eluded her for so long. Power wasn't about putting people down to elevate yourself. It was about lifting others up. It was about humility. And perhaps, after all this time, she would finally learn that. The next day, I arrived at work early, as I always did, ready to tackle the day. As I passed by the cafeteria, I noticed something that gave me a small sense of hope. Zariah was standing at the sink, scrubbing dishes alongside Maria, the woman she had once so openly disrespected. The two of them were talking quietly, but there was something different in Zariah's posture, something softer, less defensive. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and that was all I could ask for. The days that followed felt almost surreal. There was a shift in the atmosphere at work, one that was subtle but unmistakable. Zariah was still in the cafeteria, still cleaning dishes and helping with the less glamorous tasks, but there was a change in her behaviour. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there were moments when I saw her genuinely interacting with the staff, asking them about their day, or even making small talk with Janet about the best ways to clean certain surfaces. It wasn't the kind of behaviour I had expected from her, and it made me cautiously optimistic. She had stopped standing in the corner, arms crossed as she had done when she first started working in the kitchen. Instead, she had started to put in real effort, and while it was clear she wasn't completely comfortable, she was trying. I kept my distance, watching from the sidelines, waiting to see if this would last, if she would continue to embrace the humility that had so clearly been absent before. But there was still something raw about her presence. Her pride hadn't fully been broken, and I could see her eyes still defiant whenever someone mentioned her previous position. She was trying to put on a mask, to pretend she wasn't bothered by the change, but the truth was, there for anyone who cared to look, Zariah was struggling. She hadn't yet come to terms with the fact that she was in this position because of her actions, that she had earned every bit of the humiliation and punishment that came with it. A week after our last conversation, I decided to have another meeting with her. This time I wanted to see if the shift in her behaviour was genuine or just another phase she was going through. When I called her into my office, I could see the anxiety in her eyes. She didn't know what to expect. Neither did I, but I had to confront it head on. "Sit down, Zariah," I said as she entered, trying to keep my tone neutral. She obeyed, but her body language was stiff defensive. I didn't speak right away. Instead, I just looked at her, watching the way she fidgeted with her fingers, the way her gaze flickered nervously between me and the floor. "How's everything going in the cafeteria?" I asked, breaking the silence. She hesitated for a moment before answering clearly, trying to keep her emotions in check. It's been hard, she said finally, her voice quieter than I had heard it before. But I'm doing what's asked of me. I nodded. That's good to hear. I've seen some improvements, Zariah. I've seen you working with the staff, interacting more, helping out where you can. But let me ask you this. How does it feel? She looked at me, her lips pressing together, as if she was deciding how to answer. It's not easy, she said slowly, almost as if she was speaking to herself. I don't like it, but I know I need to do it. I know I have to prove that I can change, that I'm not the person I was when I first got here. I studied her carefully. There was something different in her eyes, something more genuine than I had seen before. It wasn't a full transformation, but there was an acknowledgement that perhaps she wasn't as untouchable as she once thought, that she was learning, slowly but learning. But good, I said. That's the first step. But let me ask you another question, Zariah. She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still wary. What have you learned about yourself in all of this? About how you treated people? About how you treated me? She shifted in her seat, her gaze dropping to her hands as she thought carefully. The silence between us stretched on thick and heavy. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, more vulnerable than before. I learned that I was wrong. She admitted her words carrying a weight they hadn't before. I've treated people like they didn't matter because I thought I was better than them, but I'm starting to see that everyone matters. No matter where they work or what their role is, we all contribute something. I let her words sink in, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope. That's a good realization, I said softly. But it's not enough to just recognize it. You have to live it every day. You have to show people, not just tell them. She nodded, her expression serious. I know. I've been working on it. I've been trying to really listen to people, to show them that I see their value, that I respect them. I leaned forward, slightly studying her more closely. You've got a long way to go, Zariah. I'm not going to lie to you. The road ahead is still full of challenges, but if you want to stay here in this company, in this family, you're going to have to prove it every day, not just through your actions, but through your attitude. No more arrogance, no more belittling people because you think they don't measure up. Zariah looked up at me, her eyes steady, but there was a softness in her gaze now. I get it, she said, her voice firm. I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want a chance to show I can change. I nodded, leaning back in my chair. You have your chance. What you do with it is up to you. As Zariah left my office, I felt a sense of finality. It wasn't a victory, and it certainly wasn't over, but it was progress, and progress, no matter how small, was something to hold on to. The next day, I walked through the cafeteria again. Zariah was at the counter talking to Maria and Janet about the best way to clean the industrial ovens. This time, she wasn't standing off to the side waiting for someone to tell her what to do. She was actively engaging, learning, contributing. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and that was all I could ask for. That evening, I went home and sat in my small apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about my son, about the way Zariah had treated me, and how for so long I had let her get away with it. But I had stood my ground, and I had forced her to confront her own behaviour. Whether she fully understood it or not, she had learned that actions have consequences. And maybe she would come out of this experience a better person, a stronger person, but only time would tell. I picked up my phone and sent Marcus a text. Tell Tommy Grandma will be over tomorrow to read him the princess story. And don't forget, dragons are still scared of the dark. I smiled as I hit send, knowing that whatever happened with Zariah, I still had something real in my life, something that could never be taken away. The next few weeks were a blur of changes, small, subtle shifts in behaviour and attitude that mark the beginning of a new chapter for both Zariah and the company. She continued her work in the cafeteria, but now there was a noticeable difference in how she approached it. Her attitude had softened. The sharpness in her voice when she spoke to the staff had faded, replaced with a more considerate tone. She asked questions, listened intently to the answers, and actually tried to learn not just to get by. It wasn't easy, and I could see how much she struggled with it. The pride that had once defined her was slowly eroding piece by piece as she was forced to confront the reality of her actions. But there were moments, brief flashes, when she truly seemed to understand, when she made a point to thank the older employees for their help, when she apologised for her past behaviour, when she stepped up to take on a difficult task without complaining. I kept my distance, observing her quietly. I knew that she wasn't out of the woods yet. Old habits die hard, and I had learned the hard way that people who were used to power didn't give it up easily. But this time, there was a part of me that truly hoped that Zariah was changing. She was facing consequences, yes, but she was also learning lessons she had never taken the time to learn before. Meanwhile, I continued working on the changes within the company. HR had begun implementing the sensitivity training, and feedback from employees was positive. It was a step in the right direction. The culture at Meridian Technologies was shifting slowly but steadily. I was determined to make sure that the lessons Zariah had learned wouldn't be in vain, that the company could come out stronger for it. But change, even the smallest kind, doesn't happen overnight. And though Zariah was making strides, I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. One afternoon, as I was walking down the hallway toward my office, I passed the cafeteria. Zariah was at the sink scrubbing dishes, but this time she wasn't alone. Maria, Janet, and a few other employees were gathered around her chatting as they worked. Zariah was laughing, genuinely laughing. I couldn't help but stop and watch for a moment. The tension that had once filled every corner of the room was gone. There was a lightness in the air, a camaraderie that hadn't existed before. It wasn't much, but it was progress. I felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that the lessons of the past few months were finally beginning to sink in. As I entered my office, I sat down at my desk, reflecting on everything that had happened. Zariah's transformation wasn't complete, not by a long shot, but it was clear that she was making an effort. And sometimes that's all we can ask for. A few days later, I received a message from Marcus. He wanted to meet. I had mixed feelings as I made my way to the coffee shop where we agreed to meet. I had seen Marcus more in the past few weeks than I had in years, and our conversations had been difficult, but meaningful. He was struggling to balance his love for his wife with his need to stand by me. But Zariah's actions had put a strain on their marriage. It was hard for him to admit, but I could see the cracks forming. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Marcus was already sitting at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. His face was tired, as if the weight of everything, his marriage, his family, his career, was finally catching up to him. "Mom," he said, as I sat down, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about Zariah, about you." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I want to thank you," he said, looking me directly in the eyes. "I've been so caught up in trying to make everything perfect, trying to protect her, that I didn't see what was happening. I didn't see what she was doing to you, to everyone. I should have stepped in sooner. I should have been there for you." I could see the guilt in his eyes, the regret that came from realizing that he had failed to protect the people who mattered most in his life. I reached across the table, placing my hand on his. "You're my son, Marcus," I said softly. "I've always been proud of you, but sometimes you have to see the truth even when it's hard. Zariah she's not a bad person, but she's made mistakes, and she's learning just like we all are." Marcus sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "I'm just so torn, Mum. I love her. I want to make it work, but I don't know if I can keep going like this. I don't know if I can keep making excuses for her. I can't keep watching her tear apart everything she's built, including us. I squeezed his hand gently, trying to offer him some comfort. I understand, Marcus. It's not easy. Relationships are never easy, but you have to decide what matters most. You have to decide what kind of life you want. Do you want to stay in a marriage where you're constantly protecting someone who doesn't see their own flaws? Or do you want to be free from that burden, even if it means facing some uncomfortable truths? He looked at me, his eyes tired, but clearer than I had seen in a long time. I think I need to face the truth. I need to stop protecting her from everything, including her own mistakes. I smiled a small but meaningful smile. I'm proud of you, Marcus. It's not easy to face the truth, especially when it hurts. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if he were already processing what he would have to do next. I've been thinking about what you said, he said quietly, about Zariah and the choices she's made, and I think I need to let her go through this on her own. I can't keep trying to fix everything for her. I sat back, letting his words settle between us. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Zariah had to learn to stand on her own, to take responsibility for her actions, without relying on others to make things right for her. We sat in silence for a few moments, both lost in our thoughts. Finally, Marcus looked up, his eyes clear and determined. I'm going to talk to her mom. I'm going to tell her the truth, and I hope she gets it. I hope she sees what she's been doing to all of us. I hope so too, Marcus, I said softly. But whatever happens, just know that I'm here. I'll always be here. After our conversation, I left the coffee shop feeling a sense of relief. It wasn't the end. There were still challenges ahead, especially with Zariah, but it was a step in the right direction. Marcus was starting to see the truth, and that was the most important thing. As I walked back to my office, I felt lighter. The weight that had been on my shoulders for so long was finally starting to lift, and no matter what happened with Zariah, I knew that I had done the right thing. I had stood my ground, fought for what mattered, and now it was time for everyone to make their own choices. The future was uncertain, but it was also full of possibility, and that was all I needed to move forward. The weeks that followed Marcus's decision to confront Zariah were tense, to say the least. It wasn't easy for him. Every conversation with her seemed to result in more emotional turmoil, more guilt, more uncertainty. But it was clear to me that Marcus was finally taking ownership of his role in this. He was no longer acting as the protector of Zariah's faults. He was willing to let her face the consequences of her actions. And that was something that, for all her manipulation and cruelty, Zariah needed to learn. I had been waiting for the inevitable fallout. I knew Zariah would be angry, that she would try to fight back against the changes she was being forced to face. But I also knew that the longer she resisted, the longer the process would be for her to truly grow. If she was ever going to change, she had to come to terms with her actions herself. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. It wasn't until a month later that I finally received a message from Zariah. She requested another meeting. I had been bracing myself for this moment ever since our last conversation, and despite everything, I felt a little uneasy. I had given her the space to prove herself, to show me that she was truly committed to changing. But I knew that things weren't perfect. No one could expect perfection. The question was, would she finally admit to the changes she needed to make, or would she continue to play the victim? I arrived at the meeting room early, and a few minutes later, Zariah entered. This time, she didn't look as defiant as before. Her usual sharp, calculating demeanour had softened somewhat, but she still held herself with a certain pride. She was no longer the woman I had met all those months ago, someone completely untouchable and sure of her superiority, but she still wasn't entirely at peace with what she had become. There was a tension in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. She sat down across from me, her hands clasped tightly on the table. There was silence between us for a few seconds before she spoke, her voice steady, though laced with a hint of uncertainty. I wanted to meet with you to discuss where I'm at and to apologize. Again, I raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. I was watching her closely, trying to discern whether this apology was sincere or just another attempt at manipulation. I know I've said it before. She continued, her eyes flickering toward the floor before meeting mine again. But I don't think I really understood what I did until recently. I didn't realize how much my actions hurt you or everyone around me. I treated people like they were beneath me, and for that, I'm sorry. Her words, although familiar, felt different this time. There was a certain vulnerability in her voice that hadn't been there before. It wasn't easy for her, but there was something real about the admission. I could feel that she was trying, and that for the first time, she was truly looking inward. I've been working in the cafeteria for a while now, and I won't lie, it hasn't been easy, she said, pausing for a moment. But it's given me time to think, time to realize how much I took for granted. I don't know if I can ever truly make up for what I've done, but I want to try. I want to prove that I can be different, that I can be better. I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. It wasn't an apology wrapped in excuses. It wasn't her usual act of deflection. There was something about the way she was speaking that told me she was starting to understand, that she was finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of her actions. You've taken responsibility for what you've done, I said, my voice calm but firm. That's a big step, Zariah. But I need to know that you're not just saying these things because you think it will get you what you want. I need to know that you truly understand what it means to change. Zariah nodded, her expression serious. I do understand. I've had to face what I've been doing to people. I've seen it in the way they've treated me, in the way they look at me now. I've had to deal with that every single day. And I know I can't just go back to how things were before. I studied her for a moment, weighing her words. You've made progress, I can see that, I said slowly. But it's not enough just to apologize. You have to show it through your actions. Every day, you have to prove that you've changed and that you respect the people you once treated so poorly. Zariah nodded again, her eyes steady. I know, I've been working on that. I've been trying to make things right with the people I've hurt. I'm not asking for forgiveness, not right away, but I want to show you and everyone else that I can be the person I was supposed to be. It wasn't perfect. She wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing the real Zariah, the one who wasn't defined by her ego or her arrogance, the one who had the potential to learn to grow, to change. You've got a long road ahead of you, I said, my voice gentle but serious. But if you keep moving forward, if you keep making the effort, you might just find the redemption you're looking for. Not just in the eyes of others, but in your own eyes. And that's the hardest part, truly accepting who you've been and who you want to become. She was quiet for a moment, processing my words. Then, to my surprise, she smiled an honest smile, one that seemed to acknowledge how far she still had to go, but also the progress she had made. Thank you, she said softly, her voice still steady but warmer, for giving me this chance. I won't waste it. I nodded, allowing myself to feel a sense of cautious hope. I didn't know what the future held for Zariah or for our family, but I knew that for the first time she was taking responsibility for her actions, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. As Zariah left my office, I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the city below. It was a long journey, a journey filled with setbacks and moments of doubt, but it was a journey that could still lead to something better for all of us. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, I had hope. And sometimes that's the only thing you need to keep going.